So thank you so much for being here. Especially after talking to you out there and watching this and the way it ended. I guess I'm sort of struck by the power of her role and the power in you capturing that. And just to start off, how did you start? What drew you to this?
So you mentioned that I worked on a series called Makers, which is about the modern women's movement. So that was in about 2009, 10, 11. I was working on this, and that's when I first learned about Justice Ginsburg. I mean, I knew she was on the Supreme Court. I had no idea about her history as a women's rights litigator. So I interviewed her then for this Makers project, and we did a short video. Makers, is an online collection of stories of groundbreaking women. It was also a documentary about the women's movement. So that was how I first got to know her. And then in 2015, I had worked with a woman, Julie Cohen, who's my wonderful co-director on this film. And Julie had worked a little bit with me in Makers, and she had also interviewed Justice Ginsburg for another project. So in 2015, we were talking about this phenomenon of the notorious RBG that you see in the film here, and we said, I bet a lot of her fans don't really know the whole story, and we had a glimpse of it, including the love story. I mean, I had a pretty good sense that there was an extraordinary love story there, and hey, that's always a great thing for a movie, so we just said, let's make this documentary, and then we kind of set about doing that. So that was 2015.
Is it true that she's not big on small talk? Did you find that making the film?
That was she what?
Not big on small talk?
No, she is not big on small talk, and she's pretty intimidating. I mean, she's a Supreme Court justice, and she's very, retiring, and you find it, hard to have small talk with her or approach her. But as we spent more time, as we kind of got into the film, I began to recognize, the rhythm of her speech, and to admire the fact that she does have a great sense of humor. And she's a very thoughtful and lovely person.
Yeah.
And,
One thing towards the end of the film where, she talked about apologizing for comments she made about Trump.
Yeah.
Did you find that she was as forthcoming, as you made the film, about her thoughts on things, or did you find that she was actually more reserved?
Well, there's a tradition in our country that, despite recent events that you may have seen, that, Supreme Court justices are supposed to be kind of above politics and really not talk about either politics or issues that might come before the court. They are supposed to be, it's the highest law of the land, so they really shouldn't be discussing things that may be argued before them. And that's just kind of understood. Mm-hmm. So it's not that we were actually asking her about those things. I mean, a lot of the story did have to do with, the history that she was very happy to talk about.
Right.
Her time is limited, so it's not like we had a tremendous amount of time. I mean, the way we approached the film actually was to, we interviewed many people close to her through different parts of her life. We didn't interview experts. I mean, we sort of decided we don't want to interview experts, but we want to interview people who are experts in the sense that they, know her, that they lived through part of this with her.
Right.
And then we started following her around to lots of the events that she speaks at that you see in these things. She went to VMI, or she talks to law students, or, the things that she does. And, those occasions would be more like, hi, Justice Ginsburg, we're here. Like she'd be off in the distance and we'd be back filming, with long lens. And eventually we did, get closer and asked her for permission to film some of the more personal scenes with her family and, in her office. And then we asked and, held our breath about, could we go with you to the gym? And it kind of amazed me. I mean, she paused. I got up the nerve to ask. I mean, Julie said my voice was like this. I could barely. Do you think it would be possible for us to film you at the gym? And, there was a pause, and then she just said, yes, I think that would be possible. So, it was a kind of process of getting closer to her. We actually didn't do the final interview. We put the whole film together. For those of you who are, interested in filmmaking or whatever, we structured the whole film. We had pretty much, a very strong rough cut before we interviewed her. And that allowed us to really target what we needed to ask her about. So, for example, she's talked about Harvard at many, many different places, talked about what it's like to be a woman at Harvard, 9 out of 500. We didn't need to ask her about that, but we knew we needed to ask her about her mother, or, we obviously had to ask her about the Trump comments, which were, surprising, and I think surprising to both her supporters and to her critics, and, we had to ask her about that. So there were, some things that we knew we had to, once we put together the film, and said, what do we need,
Yeah.
So that's how we structured it.
And so I'm going to give myself away, but on the subject of Trump, one thing that I have been thinking a lot about, and I'm sure many folks here, although I don't want to make assumptions, but is channeling my rage and disappointment. And so, I had an MTA experience this morning where I realized after waiting for 3 hours and then being angry for an hour, I was like, that used a lot of energy and I'm exhausted. And so there was a point where she talked about, she never let people see her anger, and I'm sure there's a whole other discussion that could be had about how anger can fuel things and when it can't and blah, blah, blah. But, I think there's a lot that the society and this country is fighting right now, and one thing I'm curious about, especially in your field and covering what you do, is there any advice that you could give on how to find a balance between being disciplined and compassion and keeping the compassion?
Yeah. Look, I think the whole issue of women's anger is just so front and forward, right now. It's out there. There's so many people who are very angry about what's going on, and that anger is fueling action, and you can say that maybe some of that action is having some results. Certainly during the women's movement in the late 60s and the early 70s, there were a lot of really pissed off women, and they were marching in the street. That was not Ruth Bader Ginsburg style, but it doesn't mean that she was against it. It's just that's not who she is, and I think she just felt that she had a contribution to make to her country in a very different way. I've struggled with this too, because I think that sometimes anger can be self-defeating. It's just like wasting your time just being so angry.
Yeah.
And I, after spending 3 years, almost 4 years, following Justice Ginsburg around, I think I am trying a little bit more to think strategically, okay, what's practical here? What can I do that's really going to make a difference? What's the long game? And she definitely plays the long game. Look at her now. She's writing dissents. She doesn't want to be writing dissents. She wants to be, writing majority opinions. And yet, here she is. She's 85 years old, and she's not throwing up her hands in disgust. It's like she's going to do her job.
Right.
And she feels that it's important to do what she's doing, and maybe we'll have to wait for history to prove her right. Who knows? But it's that she's so disciplined that way. I find that inspiring.
Yeah. Well, and I have a million questions. I'll ask one more and then open it up. But to that point, there was a comment someone made in the film about how and to your point about the long game, about how she'd been creating this legal landscape. And I was having a chat with a couple of people recently about, on the idea of marching, how someone thought that could be, instead of a march, maybe instead of spending money on a march and spending money on making a hat, spend the money on lawyers to fight something like kids in cages. And then someone else was like, well, but we need a holistic approach. We can do that and still march.
Yeah.
And so, what, to the point about finding, I guess I'm asking for more advice. I guess what's something else that you learned about like how she was able to tap into what she needed to do? Like what advice would you give to like this community about tapping into the skills that we have?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is recognizing what you're good at and also working hard to become better at it. I mean, clearly this woman is a super brain. Let's face it, not all of us not all of us have the ability to have the legal mind that she did, and she worked very hard in her education, and she became really good at it. I think, and yet she is part of the women's movement, and she's, for example, I first heard about her actually from Gloria Steinem, who was working with us on this women's movement project, and, Gloria's interviewed here. They recognize each other's strengths early on. Gloria has a different mission. She is an activist, and she is an articulate spokeswoman, and she is also a grassroots organizer, and travels all around the country trying to empower women and other people for causes that she believes in. I mean, that's her mission, and I think she's had an extraordinary life. So it's not like Ruth Bader Ginsburg has the way. It's just that I think it's finally people, have a chance to recognize what it is she did. She didn't really sing toot her own horn. A lot of people didn't know actually what she accomplished. I mean, the other thing to take from her is the fact that she had this amazing relationship. And, I don't belittle that. I think that she says it's the luckiest thing that ever happened to her. I think that's absolutely true. She feels that Marty Ginsburg recognized her talent and just made it possible for her to do what she did. And wow, what a gift.
Yeah.
I mean, she's so lucky, that she had that love and that, she was able to have a strong relationship. I think that's a
you seem like a rare find.
Yeah, I know. Like, whoa. And you see how pretty she was, and she's probably fending off all the boys at Cornell. And, I just love the story.
Oh yeah, the part about her only one. Refusing second dates. Yeah,
second dates, just like going through all these guys until she met Marty. It's so great.
Does anyone in our crowd have any questions to ask?
Yeah,
I'd like to follow up. Hi. First question. So have you had a chance to follow up with her post to kind of heard her thoughts on Kennedy retiring and Kavanaugh and all that?
She's not going to talk about it. She's just not going to talk about it. And, and if she said anything off the record, I wouldn't share it. Obviously, she's, I'm sure, she wants to have a new colleague on the court. Having just 8 members of the court has meant that last year they had a lot of decisions that were sort of 4-4 and things that they couldn't really decide. So, whether or not she knows Brett Kavanaugh, she may. He, I think, was a clerk. Was he not at the court? I think he was. So she may.
Yeah, I just wonder with Kennedy retiring and her, sticking until the very end, just so she had any.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I can't tell you. All I know is that my partner, who's a much better tweeter than I am, when Kennedy retired, she did the funniest tweet. It was like. It was a picture of Justice Ginsburg, in the gym, and it said, America to RBG, just period, keep period planking.
I just so I noticed in the credits that it looked like a majority female production. Was that?
Yeah. Absolutely deliberate. I mean, basically, Julie and I are women. We decided early on that given who Justice Ginsburg was, it'd be great to have a female DP, and so, that was very deliberate. Then we, luckily, our executives at CNN Films were all women. That was serendipitous. That just happened. I mean, they were the people who stepped up and supported the film. We'd gone to several other places and been turned down. They supported it. And then it just kind of cascaded. We said, all right, let's get a female editor. We got the great Carla Gutierrez, who, was an amazing editor, so much fun to work with. And, AP. It's not that we didn't work with some men, we did. Like we weren't, discriminatory about it, but it was a really wonderful atmosphere. We had other than the kind of nervousness of making a film and, doing shoots and is it going to work and is the court going to let us do this and can we get the scenes that we need? I mean, all that kind of nerve-wracking stuff that you go through when you're making a film. Once we had it all in the can, I mean, it was really a joy. Like the last 3 months of making this film with this female team, we had so many laughs. It was a riot. It was really fun. Yeah.
Being that she's the oldest woman on the tour, do you know about her relationship with Kagan and Sotomayor? Did she serve as a mentor for them?
Yeah, I mean, people have asked us, like, why didn't we do more with them in the film? And it was sort of like a question of time in a way. I mean, I think that she was, when Sandra Day O'Connor retired, she was alone, and she has spoken about how she hated that she was the only woman on the court for several years from the time that O'Connor retired. And she's really happy to have Kagan and Sotomayor there. I mean, I know she is. And, I think she has a good relationship, frankly, with all the members of the court. The Scalia relationship was a special one and a weird one in a way, but let's face it. But they shared a couple of things, not only the love of opera, which is, she is so devoted to opera and to music. I mean, she just loves music, and he did too. They're very knowledgeable about it, and I think they connected on that level. She loved his sense of humor, because he was a funny guy. And I think intellectually, they had a lot in common. They liked to spar. He was an expert in procedural law, which I barely even understand what that is, but we didn't really go into it in the film. But I think they had a meeting of the minds on procedural law, that they had this real kind of intellectual respect for each other. So, and I'm sure she respects those women. I mean, they're often on the same side. I mean, they're voting often, in these decisions. Yeah.
There's a new movie coming out about her.
Yeah.
On the basis of sex.
Yeah.
Have you been able to talk to people who are doing that movie at all? And do you know how it came about?
Yeah, I do, actually, because that movie, there's a new narrative movie about Justice Ginsburg, and it's not like this movie at all. It is about one particular case that she and her husband took on very early on in her career. It's actually before she argued anything before the Supreme Court. We sort of pick up the story, we jump a little bit into the story when there she is arguing that first case. The one that this film is about is an earlier case, but gender discrimination case. And it came about because her nephew is the screenwriter. Marty's nephew came to her, I think about 5 years ago, and said, I want to write a screenplay about you, can I do it? And she said, okay. So when we started to film this, or we started working on it, we knew about Daniel, and we were in touch with him, and originally Natalie Portman was supposed to play Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and then she dropped out, and then it got delayed. So, we thought that maybe we would film on the set of the making of the movie, but it wound up that we were done before they had even started production. But I haven't seen it. It's coming out on Christmas. Yeah.
How do you think that will affect the documentary in terms of viewership? Do you think it will help? Or?
I think the documentary's had a pretty good run, and so I don't know that it will have an impact. I think it's more the question of how does the documentary affect, and I think it gives more attention to the film, probably. And, so we made this film. CNN Films was our producer of this film, but when it went to Sundance, CNN sold the distribution Participant, and Participant is the distributor of On the Basis of Sex. So they made a decision that it was probably a good idea to coordinate these two films a little bit. And our film, we were in Sundance at the end of January. It came out in theaters in May, which is really fast for a movie to come out after Sundance. And I think part of that was both Participant and Magnolia thinking, we want to get this thing out there soon. Yeah, hi.
It seems like no other Supreme Court justice has gotten the celebrity that she has received. Do you get a sense, or does she have any feedback of what the other Supreme Court justices think of her becoming?
Yeah, I'm sure. Look, I think they make jokes about it, and who knows if there isn't some jealousy? I don't know. She's never said it. I went to an event in June at the Second Circuit District Court Conference in upstate New York, and Justice Ginsburg is the Supreme Court justice who oversees the Second Circuit. Each one of them has a circuit that they're kind of... So she goes to that every year and speaks to, all the lawyers who argue in the Second Circuit and the judges. It's like this, big conference they have. And Justice Roberts this year came. Like, he doesn't always come, but he came and they did a Q&A. Before all of it, and he was amused by it because it came up in the discussions, and he was kind of funny about it. I think that had Justice Scalia had a pretty big personality and had a pretty big presence on the right. I mean, he didn't have a documentary made about it, but I think he's someone that might well have in terms of, who he is, and the other justices so far haven't had that, but they've had books written about them, certainly, and many of them speak and, do public appearances.
Actually, the title, On the Basis of Sex, that's actually sort of leading to my next question.
Yeah.
On the Basis of Sex.
Yeah.
I remember being at the Athena Film Festival, and they went through some of the statistics about women in film and how women in documentary film actually had more of a presence in Hollywood.
Yeah.
But what are some of the challenges you faced being in the field as a woman, and how have you navigated that in the field that's pretty male-dominated?
Yeah, I think that I come from a network news television background, and when I went into the network news business in the 1970s, I was one of the few women. There were other women, but I think we all assumed that by the year 2018, women would be represented at all levels. We'd enter the pipeline, and then I had to look around, and there are not women running most of the major media organizations. Look what's happened, with the Me Too movement in the media. So it's still a pretty challenging record, although, there are some very prominent and very successful women in, journalism and in the news business, but still not adequately represented, nor are minorities adequately represented in the halls of power in the news business. Documentaries are a little different because, you don't make documentaries because you want to make a lot of money, because, it's really unlike the Hollywood where, more money is floating around, more money is at stake. So, the numbers are pathetic in Hollywood. This 4% project I did was about the fact that 4% of the directors in Hollywood are for features are women. It's better in documentaries because it's not as lucrative, and also because in a way, documentaries, it's like you reinvent the wheel almost every time you do it. You go out there, you put yourself out there, you try to raise money, you try to come up with a good idea. You're scraping around, you're piecing together things here and there, and there are a lot of women who are willing to do that. And certainly, in terms of finding the talent to work on this film, the editor, the camera woman, and the composer. There's just so much talent out there, so many talented women. It's like that was not a problem. So, yeah. Hi.
What was your process like for determining your story structure?
You know, we really decided early on that we didn't want this to be a traditional biopic. Like, we just didn't want to start with, born in Brooklyn and then went to Harvard and blah, I mean, that just seemed so boring to us. And we also didn't want to shy away from the fact that our subject is an elderly woman, because we think that's part of, that's part of the appeal of this, that she's an elderly woman. So we wanted very much to integrate whatever verite we've been able to gather at the events that she's at and the personal shooting with a chronological telling of her story. So if you look at the film, that's kind of, we go back and forth, and the biggest challenge was to find the ways to do that. Like, without having a narrator, there's no narrator, so we had to find transitions to go from one place to the other. And that was hard, and, we had our little things on the wall, our little post-it things with the various scenes, and we would move them around to try to do that. The other thing that happened was that our editor, Carla Gutierrez, looked at all 4 days of Justice Ginsburg's Senate confirmation hearings, and a lot of it was really boring. I mean, in the weeds, kind of lawyerly type stuff. But there were some wonderful moments where she's really, explaining her life, defending her life, telling her story in such a forthright way. It was Carla's idea that we could use that as a sort of structural device and keep going back and forth to that. So it allows you to go there and either go forward in time or go backward in time. And that turned out to be a pretty smart idea. So that was kind of how we hung the structure. I mean, we like every filmmaker, we were fiddling around with it until the very end, and we didn't figure out the ending for even after we submitted to Sundance. Like, we'd already submitted to Sundance, and we recut the last 6 minutes of the film. That was a challenge.
Was she opinionated about how she wanted to be seen?
No, she was unbelievable. She never interfered. I guess you asked me what was her reaction. I mean, She didn't see the film until she went to Sundance. We told her that it had gotten into Sundance and would she like to come, and she said, yeah. And she didn't say, may I see the film first? Or, I thought, well, maybe she'll want to vet this thing. Nothing. She didn't put anything off. She didn't restrict any questions. I mean, obviously we were restricted in what we could film. I mean, she's a Supreme Court justice. She's guarded by U.S. Marshals. You can't just run around filming her all the time. I mean, we had to get the permissions, but she was pretty good about giving us a variety of opportunities to film her. And then, incredible about not asking to see it. And, she really, I sat across the aisle from her when she watched the film for the first time with 500 people in the audience.
Did you watch her?
Yeah, no, I watched her. I didn't, and Julie, so I'm here, Julie's here, there's a little aisle, and then she's right there. And, oh my God, it was so nerve-wracking, because the movie starts, and if you remember the beginning of the movie, it's big sort of operatic, like a Rossini thing, with the statues and everything. And just the music comes on, and she was sitting next to Nina Totenberg, and she turned to Nina and she said, I like the music. And then I turned to Julie and I said, she likes the music. It was like that through the whole movie. She pulled out a handkerchief and cried when the music thing came up. About 15 minutes in, there's a verite sequence of her going to the opera, the Santa Fe Opera, and she's talking about the meaning of music and how it's a refuge for her and the sound of the human voice. And she wiped away a tear when the love duet was playing. She had also told us that was her favorite love duet, so we made sure to put that in there. Anyway, I mean, so it was pretty cool that she responded to it, seemed to like it.
On that note, were you worried she was ever going to fall asleep during the screening? No. She is a night owl. And I guess she hadn't had any wine to drink before the screening. I mean, she stays up late. She came to a screening
at Columbia Journalism School 2 weeks ago because they were honoring her. She's a Columbia grad. They were honoring her for 25 years on the court, and they had a whole day planned, and so we kind of cleverly planned our little screening to be that night, and I said, Justice Ginsburg, if you could stop by afterward. So we'd screen the film, and then she just walked in at 10 after 10 at night. And, it was so great. So she stays up late. Yeah.
What made you move from news to documentaries?
I had moved into a more executive role at CBS News, and then when I left CBS and I'd gone to teach at Columbia Journalism School, in the back of my mind I was always thinking, I love documentaries. I just love them. I had done some, shorter form documentaries at ABC. There was a show called Turning Point, which did hour-long documentaries, so they're like, by the time you get rid of the ads, they're like 50 minutes or something, 45. And I love documentaries. And so I had this chance to work on the Makers Project, and I took some time off from Columbia to do that. That was really fun. And then Julie and I cooked this thing up, so it just kind of happened. And I have to say, it was a lot of fun. I mean, being in an edit room, crafting a documentary, it's like, for me, it's just something, it's like a puzzle. It's like solving a puzzle. It's so much fun. Yeah.
Who was the blonde figure, the other lawyer that she worked with her?
Lisa B.D. Frelinghuysen? She is she was her clerk the year that the VMI decision was argued. And Lisa actually wrote, did the draft for the VMI decision and worked with Justice Ginsburg very closely on VMI. So, it made, in a way, we could have interviewed many, many clerks. I mean, she had hundreds of clerks or whatever. I knew Lisa. Actually, Lisa had introduced me initially to Justice Ginsburg, and it just kind of made sense that she fit into the VMI story very well. So we interviewed her. We could have, there's so many people we didn't interview who we could have, clerks included, but we didn't.
One thing that I'm still sort of turning through my head, there was a point when Gloria Steinem said, Ruth's work made me feel protected by the U.S. Constitution for the first time. And then, thinking about what's happening today with, current nominee, and in thinking about, there's so much strategizing that was discussed that she did, and even how you had mentioned, you're thinking more about that. And one thing that I feel stuck about, and I think many people in society do now, is the fact that what she did was, she'd present these compelling cases with facts, and she was able to capture the audience she had in front of her, whereas I think what feels frustrating now a lot of times is that even when facts are in front of people, they're dismissed. So when you think about strategizing, and when you think about capturing an audience, what goes through your head in terms of being able to bridge that gap?
Yeah, look, it's a very disturbing time because facts aren't facts anymore. Right. People don't, it's really, it's very discouraging. I think with RBG, one of the things that makes me happy is if I see a tweet, I just saw one earlier, I'm a Republican, but boy, do I love this movie, I have to tell you, I come from a family of Republicans, and pretty conservative, and I'm always thinking, okay, how am I going to convince my mother? What's going to get to her? I'm kind of, I try to think, and this film, I think, presents a very personal case. Both a, professional story, and, I hope that maybe it changes some minds about, what she did and how important it was. The fact is that in 1970, the idea that the U.S. Constitution should apply equally to men and women was a radical idea. It really hadn't been expressed. And now, despite, and this is what Justice Ginsburg, I think, might say a little bit, is despite how horrible it is now, nobody wants to go back to that. I mean, nobody is saying, oh, let's return to that area. I mean, maybe some far people on the way right, but that's not really where the debate is right now.
Yeah.
And yeah, we have some really challenging issues in front of us, but, I think that Justice Ginsburg believes that there has been progress and that there have been established precedents that are important that we can count on. I mean, it's why the Supreme Court matters so much. It's why, we're concerned about, the nominees for the court. So I don't know. What can I say?
I know. Well, and that's actually, so was there anything like making this film that was super surprising or something that just sort of changed your own perspective or?
No, I mean, what was I was surprised at how funny she is, and her sense of humor, and I just, deepened my appreciation for her determination, for just the way she's conducted herself as an 85-year-old woman. I'm just in awe of her, and I think more.
Right.
I don't know, but it was a gradual process of just coming to appreciate this life and what she's done, and
Yeah. Well, and you made an interesting comment when we were outside about, you're seeing this gap that's being bridged between...
Yeah, older women, and one of the things that's happened in screenings of the film, festivals and theatrical screenings, if we go to do talkbacks, often, there'll be women in the audience. I've had women in the 80s, in their 90s, sometimes coming out and crying. Like they feel they totally understand what she was up against. They know what it was like. And I think a sense of acknowledgement for them, like this is what it was like. This is what she was fighting. And then you have, younger women, millennial women, and even little girls. I mean, this film, it's like there'll be 8-year-old little girls who are dressed up like Justice Ginsburg, little collars, their hair back, and a gavel. It's so adorable. And do they really understand the workings of the Supreme Court? I don't think so, but they do understand that here is this really tiny, powerful person that they can relate to. And so, I see a kind of cross-generational appeal to her story that I find heartening and a change maybe from the way older feminists were considered 10 years ago even, where it's like, humorless, sexless, boring. We don't want to hear those boring old stories of the women's movement. Who cares? And now I think it just feels more relevant. Like, hey, let's look at where we came from. That makes me feel good.
Yeah. Any other questions? Well, one thing, just to wrap up, that the opera scene, it made me think of, I'm going to be a nerd right now, but it made me think of when Aristotle's 3 different kinds of friendship, and the one is his idea of like a perfected friendship was when two friends were, might have different qualities, but they're giving equally. And so an example someone once gave me was about the opera. So like if an opera singer has this talent and the audience member doesn't, but the opera singer is just giving so much, but the audience can receive it, and then it's a gift both ways. And the gift that you gave to be able to share this and capture this, capture the gift she gave is just, it's remarkable. And it's one of the reasons why this space is so important, to have these conversations, to bring this community together. So we just, on behalf of, we thank you so much.
That's so nice of you.